And we're back. Okay, Dean Legge show for early January, well, let's just call it. A lot of questions to get to. Missed the one before Christmas. I apologize. Let's get straight into it. JM Tulldog says, can you take a stab at explaining why our staff continues to employ directional kicking strategy on kickoffs is the most baffling aspect of our special teams play and the most easily correctable? I get that they don't want to mess with Marshall Morgan's kicking motion, but you'd think Barbara Erickson or one of the walk-on specialists could consistently kick the ball through the end zone. Well, they can't. And if they could, they'd do it, I think. I think there's a little bit of a misconception here about this entire thing. Allow me to get on a little bit of a fact-finding mission. When you look at kickoff return defense, Georgia ranks 66 in the country in that. So that does not sound very good, and that's true. That sounds bad. The problem with it, though, is that Georgia is only giving up 21 yards per kickoff return. Well, that's not that much. Considering a kickoff going into the end zone gets you the ball at the 25-yard line, if the person, in theory, gets the ball at the 21-yard at the goal line and takes it out, they will get to the 21, which would be better in theory than a kickoff, a touchback. Now, for me, this is a sort of non-issue. I do know that Marshall Morgan would like to kick the way he's kicking, and I think he feels like kicking it into the end zone is going to mess with the place kicking. You're talking about the guy who is undisputably the best kicker in the SEC statistically this past year, and arguably one of the top kickers in the country. Do you want to mess with points? Well, I think it depends on if you're an offensive coach or if you're a defensive coach. I think if you're a defensive coach, you say, kick the ball into the stands, let them go from the 25-yard line. It's hard to score a touchdown from 75 yards away. If you're an offensive coach, you say, no, we want points. We like points. For me, if Georgia had allowed, now there are some teams in the country that allowed 3 touchdowns this season. And there are plenty of teams that didn't allow any touchdowns. For instance, the University of Florida was allowing 16 yards a return. They were 4-8 this year. Stanford allowed 18 yards a return. They were 11-3. Does it make a huge bit of difference if you get the ball at the 22 or if you get it at the 26? For me, no. But this is kind of a false issue. I think the concern is on punt return now, or punt team. If you want me to talk about that sometime, I can do that, no problem. But people get kind of worked up about, they think it's directional kicking. I don't think that's what it is. I think when John Fabris was here, that's what it was. Now, the next question actually gets into Bryce Ramsey, but I'll say this. The one guy I think who does not kick field goals and who possibly could kick it out of the end zone every single time is Bryce Ramsey. Or at least he could come close. I saw him kick for 3 years at Camden, and he can really kick it. But do you really want your backup or possibly eventually your starting quarterback out there kicking the ball out of the end zone? I would not do that. I think it's more important thing. So to me, you go down there and you cover the kick, and Georgia's done pretty well. Frankly, I think Georgia's done pretty well. And I think they had one. They had one long kickoff return for a touchdown. Other than that, I can't remember a lot of times where you were just sitting there going, wow, they are just killing Georgia on kickoff returns. I don't remember that. And Georgia's one of the top scoring teams in the country, so they kick the ball off a lot. And I don't recall that. But, maybe I'm wrong. But for me, this is not a really huge issue. Next question, same person. I'm cautiously optimistic about Hudson Mason, but do you think there's a non-zero chance, I don't know what that means, that Bryce Ramsey beats him out for the starting job? You and others seem to be very high on Bryce, and if he picks up the offense, perhaps his talent is such that you have him play. I think this is the kind of conundrum of the year for everyone, because Hudson Mason has a 4-year head start on Bryce Ramsey and a 2.5 game start. He's not as talented as Bryce Ramsey is, but there's something to be said for what you said at the end there, which is, can he pick up the offense? And I don't think he's picked it all up yet. I don't think there's any way. But which do you go with? Do you go with skill over experience, or do you say, hey, Hudson Mason can do the job? I think Hudson Mason can do the job. I just don't think he's as good as Bryce Ramsey. I think it's both things at the same time. And I do think that he will be given a shot, but I think in the spring, but I think he's going to have to really be good. And I think he is really good. I mean, like, I'm telling you right now, if you're watching this, the kid is special. But it's not black or white. It's very gray. I mean, you don't just take off a guy that's, earned the starting position at Georgia up to this point. Now, he won't earn it if Bryce takes it away from him, because Bryce will have earned it at that stage. But I think we're a little in too quick on that. Bryce Ramsey is going to be a special quarterback at Georgia. I said the same thing about Aaron Murray about a week and a half into his starting tenure at Georgia. I think I know a little bit more about Ramsey, so I can tell these things. But Ramsey is special. He's had a huge arm, has a very good ability that you want in a quarterback, which is if you throw an interception, it's kind of like, well, I don't care. We got to go out and do it again. He reminds me a lot of Matthew Stafford. I mean, he really does in a lot of ways. Now, not physically necessarily, but if Hudson wants to keep that job, he's going to have to play well. And I do think Bryce is capable of getting them to Atlanta, but I think that's asking a lot at the same time. And I mean, he could get them to Atlanta in 2014, but I think it would be easier with Hudson. Here's another thing about, Marshall Morgan. Why can't he kick a touchback? It's not that he can't do it. It's that if you do that, it's a different swing. Okay, it's obviously a different swing. If you see the two things, if you were to line up video or even see a picture, his field goal motion is slightly different than his. You don't drive the ball all the time on a kickoff on a field goal attempt like you would on a kickoff. It's a different motion. It's kind of like the difference between a first serve or a second serve in tennis, or throwing a fastball on a curve, or a fast and a changeup, something like that. I never played baseball, so I wouldn't know. Here's another question. Do you think Bobo will implement a more fast-paced scheme next year? I know you said Mason likes to hurry up offense, and I think it makes him feel comfortable and more likely to succeed. I say go for it. Well, I think that's what's going to happen, because I think that he couldn't go fast against Nebraska for a couple of different reasons. Part of it was rain. The other part was the fact that the rain was making people swap the balls out quickly. I think Hudson wants to get up to the line and go. I think he also has to get better with reads and progressing through the reads quicker. That was pretty evident at the Gator Bowl, not as much against Tech and Kentucky. So, Hudson has to grow too. The good news for Georgia fans and for Hudson is that he has two very good quarterback coaches in Mark Richt and particularly Mike Bobo to help him get to where he needs to be. Do you think there's a team in college football that will have more depth and talent top to bottom at receiver and running back next position next year than Georgia? Personally, this is him again saying, I think we have the best weapons and offense of any team in the country. Well, they're going to be very good, and you're trying to think, because some of these teams lost guys. I mean, I think you can make a case Trey Mason was the best running back this past year at Auburn in the SEC. I think Alabama, but he's gone. Alabama, you're going to have Derrick. You're going to have a couple of other running backs there. So their running backs are going to be a little bit better than Georgia's, or in the same ballpark. The receivers at Georgia should be better. I guess the way to look at it is these guys, this is a good group of skill players on offense for Georgia. We don't know what the tight end is going to be like. We have a pretty good idea what the quarterback's like. So Georgia's going to score a bunch of points again. I mean, they did that every game this year except against Vanderbilt, where they were starting the third string or fourth string tailback, and Missouri, where the same thing was the case, and they didn't have any of the starting wide receivers. It was basically Aaron Murray, Chris Conley, and Artie Lynch, with J.J. Green or Brendan Douglas versus a legitimate defense in Missouri and, a very fortunate Vanderbilt team with some of those calls. But I don't know. I think they're going to be very good. And I think that's one reason why people think they're going to win the East next year. looking at the wide receiver position after 2014 has me a little concerned. Georgia will be losing a lot of talent next year at the position, and we really haven't recruited wide receivers well in the past few years. Bennett, Conley, and Rumpf are gone for sure, and Mitchell and Justin Scott Wesley. Now, I don't think Justin Scott Wesley is going to leave. I do think Malcolm Mitchell's gone. Rumpf has done nothing, so there's no reason. I mean, nothing's happened there. Not really a lot of experience and playmakers behind them in the depth chart. Do you think wide receiver will be one of the top needs and the targets in next year's recruiting class? I mean, I think it's huge right now. I think losing Josh Malone to the Vols hurt them. But I think you got to remember that Kenneth Williams is coming in, so that should help. I mean, it's not anything unbelievable. Kid from Miami. We visited him down there. He's a lean, tall kid. I think Reggie Davis is going to continue to do well. I don't know if he's going to be elite, but let's be honest. I mean, how many times has Georgia had elite wide receivers? It's not been a ton of times. So they kind of kill you with 1,000 stabs. But yeah, I'm with you. I think you're going to have one of the best quarterbacks in the country when Ramsey takes over, and he's going to need some receivers. But I don't know. Here's a question about why doesn't Georgia offer scholarship to return specialists? We have kickers, punters, and even long snappers on scholarship. Why not a return specialist and quit the returner by committee? Well, they gave J.J. Green a scholarship, and I think J.J. Green is it was what I would call a return specialist. He's not a running back by trade as far as the SEC is concerned, or at least what I'm used to in the SEC. So I think you're going to see J.J. take on some of that role. Maybe not punt. Now, punt's a little different than kickoff. Kickoff, you take it and you go. Punt, you got to have a little wiggle about yourself. I don't know. Georgia's had, from my recollection, two what I would call very good punt returners, or at least, Damian Gary was very good. I mean, he was just very good at that. And then Thomas Flowers, I think, was very good at that. He was not as good as Damian Gary, but they had those two guys, and they had Mikey Henderson. And that group got them through the 2007 season. And from 2008 on, they really have struggled getting that punt return where it needs to go. But with JJ, JJ, Malcolm Mitchell, Sheldon Dawson, perhaps, Tramel Terry, perhaps, Shaq Wiggins. You could have some guys back there that could do what you need. Now, the other thing to point out here on this punt situation is Georgia is always very leery, it seems, of the fake, and they don't. They like that base defense out there on 4th and 4, 4th and 5, 4th and 6, 4th and 12. Sure, they're going to try to get a return on. They're very leery of because they want to possess the ball. Now, it drives people crazy that are Georgia fans because they don't seem to understand that Georgia scores a lot on offense and not very much on special teams. But I agree with the group thinking from the staff on this one, which is, you'd prefer to possess the football rather than get a massive return. In the SEC anymore, if you go back and look at the statistics, I mean, Reggie Davis was the number 7 punt returner in the SEC this past year. I mean, think about that. That's pretty bad as a conference. So I think part of it is these punters have become very good in the conference or even nationally, and part of it's that Georgia just haven't developed that guy or gotten that guy or whatever. See, people are answering one another's questions here, so it gets kind of complicated. What's your best guess for the starting offensive line by position, as well as who will play meaningful minutes at backup? All right, let's try to do this off the top of my head. Well, on the right and left-hand side for the tackles, it will be Theus or Houston, and perhaps Mark Beard. Those guys are all going to play. Dave Andrews is going to start. We know that. John Theus will start. I'm pretty certain of. Colton Houston will start. I'm pretty certain of. So those guys will come back. The issue is you got to kind of replace Dallas Lee, who, while not spectacular, did the job. That will probably be Brandon Cubilano. The question is, can Greg Pike step up into the starting role? He's the most athletic lineman they've got, according to several people I talked to. Or will it be Walt Stansler, who's a big guy but has taken a long time to develop? Those are good questions. Now, you start talking about backups, that gets complicated. I mean, Cardiello is probably an interior backup. I don't think they're straight up 10 deep. That's not where they're at right now. But those 5 guys I mentioned, Theus, to me, I think you have 4 guys you know are going to start, or at least are the heavy. You know David Andrews is going to start. You're pretty certain Theus and Houston will start, and Beard will probably start or get a lot of minutes. He did in the past. He started a couple games in 2002. So you could get those guys in there. And the question is it Cupuano? Is it Pike? Is it Watt Stansler? You know, I mean, who is it? That's the question. So those guys, sometimes it's hard to know exactly who will be backups and so forth. Question next is, what are you watching for in G-Day? I'm trying to figure out how to get out of G-Day as fast as possible. That's what I'm watching for, is how do I leave. That thing is so boring. It's unbelievable. I think this year there's some curiosity with Bryce Ramsey, but, I mean, not that much. I mean, Aaron Murray looked horrible in spring football games several times, and he was a very good quarterback. So, G-Day, I'm looking for the exit signs. That event has really gone downhill. If you had to guess what the Georgia backfield pecking order will be next year, what will your prediction be? What happens to JJ and Brendan? And AJ, do you think Sony and Chubb will both play? I think it goes Todd, Keith, probably Sony, and then JJ will be a return specialist to me, or special team specialist. Brendan Douglas will get in there at running back, but he will be on special teams a lot. AJ Turman will be a lot on special teams. He will get some snaps at running back as well. But I think, that's a good question. But, I mean, it's definitely Todd, and to me it's probably Keith right after that. It could be Sony getting in there. I mean, Sony's different. Nick Chubb is different. They got a host of backs now, so they can do some things. Come in. You've got... No. Don't worry about it. It's okay. That's not it. Just leave it open. And you've got... Alright, sorry about that. We had a couple of things to handle when you're running the show. That happens occasionally. Is Georgia in danger of losing Brian McClendon? I think the coaching of running backs is the hardest for a casual fan to evaluate because skill can mask a lot of the problems. But as a recruiter, I think it's obvious the guy is already one of the best in college football. Unless someone offers him an offensive coordinator or a head coaching job, I doubt he would leave. But there grumblings. Not that I've heard. But you never know. I mean, we saw yesterday, Thursday, the 9th, that Scott Lakatos is gone. I mean, every single year, coaching staffs changed. I don't think there's been a single year that Georgia's had the same exact coaching staff from one year to the next. I think B-Mac, to me, in my opinion, I don't know him like I know some of the other people at Georgia. I'm not aware that he's upset or anything like that. So I can't imagine he would leave. Because now, if he was an offensive coordinator, maybe, but I mean, right now, this second, I mean, no offense to Brian, but where would you, what school would offer him the offensive coordinator position? Tennessee Chattanooga or something like that? I mean, to me, it doesn't make sense. If you're him, you're doing pretty well at Georgia. I can't remember off the top of my head what his salary is, but I'm sure he can buy a pretty nice car. I mean, I don't know. Now, I mean, guys, I mean, I know Mike Bobo wants to be a head coach one day. Todd Grantham wants to be a head coach one day. I mean, you can't blame these people. So that's just how it goes. But right this second, do I see B-Mac leaving? No. Here's a Davion Clowny question and the Falcons. You know I don't like the Falcons. I think they're losers. Half my friends want the Falcons to draft Clowny. The other half, yeah. Falcons are a disaster. Why are they building a new dome? I mean, come on. Any New Year's resolutions and your best Christmas gift? New Year's resolutions, I did not have any this year because what's the point? Best Christmas present. I can't remember. Is that bad? anyway, probably something my wife gave me, maybe. I don't know. I can't remember. Any idea why Georgia waited so long to offer Caleb Kim? Seems like Georgia waited so long in in-state talent, and they're getting burned by neighboring programs. The established relationship seems like Georgia's slow on the trigger with some in-state programs. I mean, I feel like I've talked about this a lot, but you know, it's no problem to repeat it because there is a constant. It's a good question, really. If you're Georgia and you offer a kid from Gwinnett County at Collins Hill or Nebraska, Norcross or wherever, that's viewed a little differently in those schools than South Carolina or Clemson or Tennessee or whoever throwing out an offer. Lest we forget what happened at Mill Creek, you know, with Kelsey Griffin a couple of years ago. I mean, did he have a Georgia offer or not? I mean, it doesn't seem like it because they sure didn't take it, and he wound up at South Carolina. Well, that's a good example of something looking a little embarrassing for the kid, which I don't think these people want to do, the coaching staff at Georgia, and for the school. And, you know, obviously Mill Creek, Caleb Kim goes to school there. There's none of this, you know, they're not allowed in our school anymore like you hear about sometimes in the metro area with, you know, I remember South Carolina got that at Tucker one time because the way they were with folks. But when you're the in-state school and you offer a kid, that means you've got to be ready to take it at that second. Now, things change in recruiting, and what an offer is in October may not be what it is in January because there's time and kids commit and so forth. I mean, that's what happened with Mylon Richards. I mean, you know, Georgia, I think, wanted him, but they can't wait around forever and risk losing him and another kid because they're waiting just on him. So a lot of times, as Rick has said in the past, the first kid to commit gets it. Now, your question was, why do they wait so long? I think it's out of caution a lot of times with kids. Now, to be fair, they offered, I think, about 15 kids before their junior years of football. Now, that's pretty early because kids change. Speaking of Bryce Ramsey, they offered Bryce Ramsey when he was 15 years old and had never started a high school football game. I mean, that's pretty early. But you're right. Typically, that's not been their MO. Their MO has been, let's just wait and see what the deal is. Is this kid, bigger? But, Georgia and Florida throws out offers all the time. Georgia in around the South, they throw out offers all the time in the Carolinas and so forth. So it's a little different when it's in your state because of the, natural, relationships you need to build with a kid and a coaching staff that's 40 minutes from your high school or 4 hours in South Georgia. So that's a lot of what happened. Here's another question about the offensive line, and I'll just go through the names here. Xavier Ward, Greg Pike, talked about Greg Pike, Long, and DeBell. Is Cardiello the backup at center? I think he probably is now. He was not this past year because that would have probably been Dallas Lee, or actually probably would have been Chris Burnett. But Georgia's at the point where they kind of need to figure out what they're doing at backup center. My guess is it's Cardiello. Ward, I'll believe it when I see it. Pike, again, very athletic. And I think they want him to do well. I think he'd be a pretty good guard for them. Long is curious because he actually, now that I think about it, would probably be the backup center because of being a little bit older. But center and the two guards, those are, I don't want to say they're interchangeable because they're not. But, he could get in there. Now, I don't think he's going to start, but he could. Now, Zach DeBell is a guy that I thought would take some time to get where people wanted him to go. And, that time has come. And so you need to figure out if those guys haven't had to play. You're talking about an offensive line that led them to 2 SEC championship games and within 5 yards of playing for a national championship. That was basically the same offensive line for about the last 2.5 years. So that group was pretty good, as it turns out. A bunch of 3-star guys with John Theus. So I think it shows to some degree what Will Friend has been able to do. But those other guys now are going to get their shot, but there's not going to be tons of space on that line. It will be interesting to see what happens with Zach DeBell, what happens with Long, what happens with Xavier Ward, because I think some of those guys are running out. Well, all three of those guys are running out of time, and they're going to be juniors, if my math is right. So it's time to do it. And I think there's some other stuff in here about questions about why Georgia doesn't offer earlier. I don't know. I mean, I think they've become better. They've done much better at recruiting, just period. They were straight up bad for a while, which is never what you want. But they have gotten better. Now they're not elite, not what I would call an elite group of recruiters. But that may be my perception of what they are and not what reality is. I mean, at the same time, you marry the woman you marry or the man you marry, whatever, you marry that person because they connect with you. And in some cases, I think aggressiveness or over-aggressiveness doesn't work. Where you can tell if Georgia's not done well, just go back and look at 5, 6, 7, and 8. That was bad. I mean, that was a time when, and even to some degree 10 because of the coaching changeover. But ever since Grantham and his buddies had gotten there, and ever since, Mark there was a legitimate chance that Mark Richt could get fired, they really have stepped it up tremendously in recruiting, and you can't act like that doesn't matter, because it does. They needed to sign 2 running backs a couple of years ago for the exact reason we see today, and they got Keith and Todd. Everybody thought it was going to be Keith, but it turned out to be Todd. Now, could they fill out the roster a little better over time? Yes, they could. There's no question about that. And we're entering in that season where they're going to have to decide what they want to do. But right now they're at 16. I think they'll get to 18, no problem. The question is, will they get to 20? That's a good question. They don't have near the numbers they had last year to sign. But they got Seymour, I think, coming in. He will count against this class that they're with right now, if he still plans to go to Georgia. And so you do have a couple of guys that are still out there, and Rico Johnson, I guess, in theory, could come back. There's a couple of guys that could get them to 20 that would go backwards if they signed, next December or whatever, because they're in junior colleges or prep schools. They could come back and be on the 2014 recruiting cycle. So it's a bunch of fuzzy math and craziness. They addressed basically what they needed to do so far. Now they need to sign Leonard. They need to get the last 2 guys that are out there, both Atlanta guys. The odd thing is Georgia's only going to get, right this second, they only have 2 kids from the metropolitan Atlanta area, and that's bizarre. So Lorenzo Carter's hanging out there, and then the DB from MLK is hanging out there, Wesley Green. So those 2 guys are important. I'll be curious to see if they go past that. I think they might, but they signed 34 kids last year. That's a lot. Anyway, Dean Legge Show wrapping up here. Obviously, a longer version, but you've missed me. See you next week.